How are you doing today, Juan?
It's great to see you. Um, Good to see that. Well, you've come back from your retreat, right?
I have. For our listeners, I've been away for 3 days, so yeah, been learning a lot, working a lot on self-development with work. So really good. And you've been busy this week as well, haven't you, Juan?
Yeah, it was a busy week for me as well. I mean, we had a big client meeting early in the week that went really well. And then I was actually at the Private Equity Value Creation Awards event, which was super cool at the British Museum. I did post some pictures on my socials. No, but super cool, yeah.
Amazing. What was so amazing about the event? Anything in particular you want to share with our audience?
Well, no, it was. I mean, the venue was just very cool. So it was a black tie event. Which, fun fact, I didn't have a black tie, so I had to buy one. It was my first black tie event. Um, and yeah, I mean, we came in and there was like a cocktail around all of the Egyptian section. So you were just having cocktails hanging around Egyptian statues, and then you went into the main hall. Have you been at the British Museum?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
at the main hall, there's like a glass ceiling, and so they converted that into like a gala dinner hall. And so there was a presentation, and it was sponsored by Actum, who are like it's like a software data provider. And I think one of the co-founders was there, and he gave a speech, and then they had this comedian. I didn't know his name, but apparently he was quite well known. People were taking pictures with him. We won an award, so our company won an award. So we had to go up to the stage and like take a picture, and so that was fun. And then they had a mini golf as well after the event. So yeah, it was really good. Really emblematic location. Um, and yeah, it was like everyone was there. I mean, there were from advisory firms, big names like BCGs of sorts, and um, ourselves. So the more boutique players were also around. But then there was a lot of private equity funds. I mean, we were sat at our table. There were two guys from the two founding partners from a small cap private equity firm specializing in tech. And then there was like a lead investment banker on the latest deal that they had, and the M&A director of the portfolio company. It was so, yeah. I mean, it was really cool. And then yeah, a lot of GPs, even some LPs as well were there, who was strange. I mean, I think everyone just wanted to go and have a night at the museum. No one wanted to miss that. So yeah, really cool. But how about you? I mean, so just for anyone listening, Dan was away on a retreat from his company. Was it only finance professionals?
Yeah, so yeah, Juan. So it was actually really good. So it was a 3 day training. So it's our fourth module of a five module program for the finance talent within the company. So that will be any junior manager who's been very carefully selected, or somebody who's on their future leaders program. They take the leadership aspect quite seriously. So they flew in the top two, three people from Germany, top two, three people from Netherlands, one person from France, and then the rest, because we're mainly UK based, the rest of us were from the UK. So it was a group of 15, I think, of us in the end. And basically, we went through a 3 day course with a ex CEOs and CFOs who've created their own consultancy and training programs, and they specialize in our company, having been CFOs for big businesses around the world, multiple billion revenue businesses, and so they really focus a lot. In this case, it was really interesting. So you combine. It's not just financial, so it's not just looking at numbers on a page. It's actually at this point, because we're now in more management or moving into management roles, there's a huge focus on influencing skills, a huge focus on dealing with stakeholders, from difficult stakeholders, difficult topics, and yeah, I think it's always a really really good great pleasure to do those sorts of things, and the talent in that room is amazing, and you really feel, it is like people are super impressive in that room, and I always really really enjoy it because I always take away a lot from it. In this case, it was mainly around the people side of things and how I can improve those in those areas, and apply that to my work. So super, super useful. Um, yeah, it's really well done, and I think it goes a long way. It shows you the importance of training within big companies. It
Well,
because it
you guys
yeah.
have a hotel, right, that you own where you run the training. That's
Yeah,
quite
exact.
cool.
Yeah, so we have a equivalent of like a five-star hotel. It's on a private estate in a private
Okay.
road and everything, just behind the golf course in Richmond Park. So super, super nice place to be, and just amazing food, amazing people. Really, really cool guest speakers, from our M&A teams, from our top CFOs around the business, even sales, like the general managers and things, so other functions, and talking about what they look for when working with finance professionals. So it's taken very seriously. It was super good. If anything, a bit exhausting, but a lot of fun. So yeah. Yeah, there's an open bar, so that's an interesting experience as well. So,
Yeah.
for those,
No, really cool. I mean, and so you mentioned people flew in from a lot of different places, so potentially they were hit by the. So maybe we can talk about that, right? I mean, for anyone listening, you probably know Heathrow had to close on Friday following a fire at a substation, right, Dan? So were
yeah,
any of your colleagues effective? I guess so. I mean, I
it
had people
was
affected at our
yeah.
company, so
Yeah, breakfast was absolutely mayhem on Friday. I've never seen so many panicked looking Germans and Dutch in my life. Just they're frantically trying to book the Eurostar, or working out if they could drive back, or what what to do. Yeah, so
yeah, can
unfortunately,
imagine.
yeah. No, it's a big topic. It's as if I'm, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Juan, but it was the power station, right, that caught fire.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and
yeah. No, exactly.
therefore, yeah.
Maybe you could just introduce it briefly for our audience here. It's exactly that. So a fire at a nearby electrical substation, close to Heathrow, caught fire, and that basically plunged the airport into darkness. Essentially, I mean they literally had no electricity supply, which was what forced them to have to close the airport. And just to gauge the impact that caused, over 1,000 flights were canceled. And so
Wow.
if you think that typically your typical flight carries around 200 people, that's over 200,000 travelers, so nearly a quarter of a
Wow.
million people that were meant to go through the airport that day that couldn't. So it's disruption for nearly a quarter of a million people. And it is truly unprecedented. I mean, a single incident, like a fire, not even at the airport, but at a substation, bringing a major international hub like Heathrow to a standstill. And then obviously that has knock-on effects, right? I mean, and I think the knock-on effects can still be felt today. So we're filming on a Sunday. This happened on a Friday, so there's probably disruptions still. I mean, I saw even videos of aircraft that had to turn mid-air after flying through. I think there was one, I don't remember now exactly if it was like Chicago or something, that was flying to London, and it was in the middle of the Atlantic, and it had just to turn around after 3 hours, 3.5 hours.
My
So
God.
imagine and return to its original place. So imagine being on a flight for 7 hours and then just landing where you took off.
That is
So yeah,
insane.
and I guess the big question that people are posing now is how could something like this happen? How could you have a single point of failure like this? And then people are talking about generators, right? And why did Heathrow not have generators? And it's a valid point, right? Airports do have generators. Heathrow does have a generator, but they're typically meant more as a power essential safety measure that they can kick it in case they need to evacuate the airport, but it's not meant to supply the airport with the necessary power to operate in a normal day just without the power supply. So that it does talk a bit about the resilience of the electrical grid and the infrastructure around the airport, that you can have really a single point of failure, that when a substation like that goes up in flames, there's no plan B to power the terminals. Although then I did hear, and sorry, I'm going a bit of a on a bit of a rant, but I did hear the CEO of Heathrow Airport. He gave an interview saying that they had to restructure the power supply to the terminals, and that was done pretty quickly, like, I don't know, by the morning. But the fact that they couldn't open was more due to them having to restart all of the complex systems that go into an airport, right? Like all of the baggage belts, fuel pumps, screens, all of that. They had to go and restart all of those, which is why they weren't ready to open. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. I mean, it was an event of that had a great magnitude globally. Like, it disrupted air travel globally for a day.
No, it's actually insane, and I think it is a very valid point because it shows that by nature, we get so overly focused, hyper focused on everything that is in our peripheral vision to make sure that that has, oh, a plan A, plan B, plan C. But then it's the simple things like having the right infrastructure in the back end of having the right electricity and having one, two, three different grids connecting to Heathrow so that you don't have these issues. People just forget about, or if they are very smart and they were very aware, they decided not to because maybe the risk of failure was super low. But then I also would question that in terms of terrorist attacks and the impact that something like that.
Mm.
Imagine, right? Somebody disrupted the power because they realized it was a 1 point failure for the entire air travel of the
Yeah.
airport. Um, I find that quite interesting. I also find it a very, very important factor to be aware of in terms of just human civilization, right? Like, we take a lot of things for granted, but these ecosystems that even we build, these complex machines, these complex interlinked businesses like an airport, actually, you change one thing and everything goes up, right? Imagine the
Yeah.
internet went down for a day. Imagine so many things.
Yeah, no, no. So that's absolutely right. I mean, we live in a world right now where everything is a huge networked system, and so if you imagine this, so when Heathrow fails, that has knock-on effects for everything else, and so it impacts air travel and passengers, but it also impacts cargo. I'm sure that Heathrow does route certain cargo planes as well. So that will have a knock on effect on another company that didn't expect that Heathrow could just close for a day and then they had to plan around it. I guess there's two options. Either you think that the risk is too low and that you could mitigate it quickly to build redundancy in the system, or you have a redundant system that can power the airport in case of an event like this happens.
Yeah.
I guess that's a question, right?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's on like if I think of it from a financial sense, right? It's always about in a lot of cases the argument against this is the efficiency of resources, right? If I spent all this money on this, I could have just been, created a new terminal, right? Rather than underlying infrastructure, rebuilding the entire, supply of electricity to an airport. I'm sure that is an expensive one,
Yeah. I
expensive
yeah.
project. The other thing I think is quite interesting is, as we know, but maybe our listeners don't, like airports or any sort of transport in London is already at capacity. So how long, or even if, will they ever be able to catch up with the missed flights from one day of not operating? I don't think they can, because I think the Heathrow airport's probably operating at 98%, which is the maximum you can do, with the right quality
Well,
checks
yeah,
and
for
everything.
sure. For sure they can't. I mean, because even if they said, well, we're going to ramp up our flights and instead of flying out on Friday, you can fly out on Sunday. Well, people had planned, let's say, imagine their holidays from Friday to Sunday already, so there's no point in them flying on Sunday, right? So things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and it will have a massive impact, right? I mean, did you tell me that someone you knew had a flight to Japan? Like,
Yeah.
imagine you have a flight to Japan, you're going on holiday, you've paid for everything, and that's it seldomly is refundable when something like this happens. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think
Yeah.
people are just going to really see the impact of this if you were super unlucky and were flying through Heathrow on that day.
Yeah, it's super sad. And that particular example, I think they got rerouted to Paris, but then it was a nightmare to get to Paris. They tried to change their flight to a Frankfurt flight, but the Frankfurt flight wouldn't deal with them because their flight was in London. Like, it was a huge mess. They actually left the training early on Friday just because it was just like so chaotic trying to sort it out. She was quite stressed,
Yeah.
which is a shame. But yeah,
Yeah. Oh
nice.
well. There's people. The thing is, like, I would argue that they should have had backup generators to power the airport for at least a day. I think there's so something similar happened. I was reading about this earlier. Something like this happened in an airport. I think it was in Atlanta, and I think I forget now who it was, but let's say it was the governor of the state just said, there's absolutely no excuse why your backup generator shouldn't work to power the airport for a day. Which it could be true,
I
maybe you
agree.
you do have to have just a backup generator to power the airport for a day because the level of disruption that you just cause to everyone. I mean, inflicting that pain on yourself as Heathrow Airport, but then also on all the airlines, all the passengers, and the knock on effects that has on the economy. I don't know if anyone has quantified it, but it is probably billions, to be
Yeah.
honest. Not even millions. I mean, the knock on effects that this has had for a day. So yeah, does it cost a billion to introduce a generator? Probably not. So I would say in that occasion, better to be safe.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
agree. I think the problem is then who will fund that, right? Because the knock-on effect of that 1 billion won't be the same as the company, right? Like the Heathrow Airport company
sure.
itself, right? So that's then also part of the dilemma because DHL is not going to pay 100 million quid so that their airport works. Sort of thing. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a complex piece. I agree with you. I'm just being the devil's advocate here on the problem is, you're right, if it's 10,000 different companies affected, than
Yeah,
or
no,
people.
that's
Yeah.
that's a good point. I think to an extent, then that's why you have governments. And
Yeah.
maybe the government should intervene there, but um, yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Why don't we shift gears into our next topic here? So we wanted to also talk about Musk's surprise all hands meeting that happened the other day. Um, so maybe just for anyone listening that isn't aware, Tesla stock has dropped around 50%, so 50, half since mid December. That is crazy. That yeah, I mean, literally losing half of your market value in a few months is crazy. And obviously, people have mentioned that it could be due. I mean, there's multiple reasons for it. Uh, One of the reasons, and maybe the primary one that all the public can see, is that Musk is now busy with all of these other projects and Doge and spending all his time in the White House. So there are questions as to if he can be running a company like Tesla on the side, sort of, which is a valid question. Although again, he's not all that operational anymore. And so he held this surprise late night all hands meeting to just reassure employees against the negative media coverage. And so he had a few funny quotes like, "I just can't go past TV these days and see a Tesla on fire." Yeah, it just it felt like Armageddon for Tesla for a few days. So yeah, Dan, I don't know if you saw this or if you had any
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, no, I thought the first point isn't, I mean, taking a step back on what's happened with the share price, I thought was, I had a quick look at like, the 1 year, 5 year sort of trends, and it actually did increase a lot, right? So what ended up happening was that in the last, let's say, 8 months, it's steadily increased, and then it's dropped significantly. Something I know through work is that companies, especially with big operations in the US, the whole tariffs discussion, despite Trump obviously working with the current president and everything, is that in some cases, and especially in the manufacturing field for more complex items, the impacts of Mexico and China can be quite significant in terms of your overall cost structure as well. So there is a natural pressure on these companies to, in terms of their procurements and supply chains, to actually get the right materials at a good price. So I think maybe, I mean, I haven't looked into it properly. I don't think I would even be able to find all of the information publicly, but there might be huge elements there that investors are concerned of, but that's more a blanket across the US economy as a whole, right? And it happens to be that Tesla's one of the biggest companies, so then maybe you feel that move out at a macro level as a bigger deal. Now, that could explain 10% of the share price reduction, not 50. So I thought that
Hmm.
was a interesting starting point, but I totally agree, there is a general concern on what is going on. Some of the things maybe he's come out with, his reputation, and therefore people's belief in the business. It is quite
Well,
interesting
yeah,
to see him like this though, because it takes me back a few years when Tesla was really struggling. Um, Back in like 2019, I think it was.
right, okay, yeah,
You know,
yeah. That was the whole supply issues that they were having, right?
yeah, and they were trying to get people to help them because they were gonna go. They had huge cash flow problems, and they were trying to
Yeah,
just float. So it's
yeah,
interesting to. I'm not saying it's the same, but there are nostalgias from that era where Trump was all over the place, and now he felt like he was king of the world. And now maybe he's starting to get all nervous again. So it's an interesting
yeah.
one.
Well, we shouldn't forget either that Tesla has been overvalued for a while,
Yes.
and so I'm no expert in valuing companies through fundamental methods or anything like that. I'm not a finance guy, but I do know that Tesla's price to earnings ratio is historically
Insane.
around 200 or like 220 times. So for anyone listening, well, maybe Dan, you can explain what that means.
Yeah. So for anybody listening who doesn't know what a PE ratio is, which you'll probably hear in the Big Short or finance bros walking down the street talking about, is that the PE ratio refers to the share price versus the earnings ratio. Now, what that means is effectively it's a calculation of the payback period for how much money you would get in how many years based on the current price and the current earnings in the future. So it basically tells you if if you're currently paying $100 and you're getting $10 every year in 10 years time, you would effectively get your $100 back that you put in
Yeah,
initially.
correct. Yeah.
Now,
So if you've got a price to earnings ratio of 10, then that means that the company's earning. So one example could be the company's earning 10, and you're
yeah,
paying 100 for it. So the market
exactly.
value of the share is 100. So in this case, it's more like the company's earning 10 every year, and you're paying 2,000 for it.
Yes,
So
exactly.
so yeah, insane.
So, so the reason that would be is because your future expectations of the earnings are factored in, especially in technology. So you expect that the share price will continue to rise because the earnings will continue to rise. But coming back to fundamentals, 100, 200 is ridiculous. I don't want my kids to, in 3 years' time, be owning Tesla stocks, right? Like that's just getting the money back in theory if everything stays the same, right? It is that next level over evaluation. That is for sure the case.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so some companies will have really inflated price to earnings ratios because the expectation is that the trend is that they're having incredible growth. So people are already factoring in not the current earnings but the future earnings, right? But still, like Dan says, the stock was overvalued for a while. Even Elon said it. And so the thing is, right? So now 100. I don't know. I just checked it. It's around 110, 120 price to earnings. I don't know if that is still a lot. The fact that it came down by 50% really signals that it was really overvalued. But the thing is, Tesla has so much opportunity to capitalize on so many trends, right? So AI is one, full self-driving is another one. I mean, Elon was saying people just don't understand the impact that introducing full self-driving to a fleet of how many cars does Tesla have? It was around, wasn't it around like 10 million cars or something like that? I think it was
I'm
something
not
crazy
sure.
like that.
Not
Um,
sure.
so imagine the impact of introducing full self-driving to a fleet that large. And then not only that, but they're introducing these Optimus humanoid robots that Musk has called potentially Tesla's biggest product ever as well. Maybe Dan, you can give a bit more color around that, but the point here being there's a lot of potential still for Tesla, so it might be a good moment to buy the dip.
Yeah, I mean, on one side, that is very true. Like it's one of the best, well, and most strategically placed companies in terms of a lot of important trends in the future and technology. So I do think that there is huge potential. I would argue in terms of if you compare it to any industry benchmark, right? However you slice and dice it, 122 years till you get your money back means you're already very, very optimistic around the future potential of this company. And even to have achieved a worthwhile investment or a higher than expected investment is quite difficult with that sort of price earnings ratio. So my argument from a more risk neutral perspective would be it is factored in, and I think it is already factored in terms of people's investment in the company. Yeah, so Optimus was launched as one of these products, and I think it will be really, really interesting to see how this develops. They're going to launch 5,000 units in 2025. They're going to move into 2026, really starting to build this out. It's going to be one of their biggest products yet. The demonstrations have been really, really cool. I'm sure everybody's been seeing clips of this online. Personally, I think it's going to be a really, really big move, and it shows where the real technology is moving. It shows the strength of having also strong leaders who see a vision of where the world is going and making that a reality. And just like Tesla has done with the past with the cars, which at the end of the day are more a upgrading software machine, which will, eventually suddenly all 10 million cars will be self-driving. It's going to be astonishing to see. Is that sort of business model, that sort of continuous improvement, that sort of software first will mean that these Optimuses and the equivalents, I think they're going to get really, really exciting, really, really powerful, because already now it'll be future proofed for future updates and improvements. So I think that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, so why do humanoid robots have so much potential? I guess is one question.
Yeah.
And one of the answers is everyone talks about how AI, for example, has a lot of potential, and we've seen massive productivity improvements, not only from AI, but from technology in general, right? But if you think about how you leverage that technology and how you use it, you need to interface with that technology through a screen. And now the change that can be introduced is that if you can integrate all of that technology in a humanoid form, then you can interface with it just as a regular employee or a regular colleague, or a regular companion. Like imagine the power of combining AI, natural language, all of these technologies, camera vision, like all of the improvements that have led us to where we are today, and then putting them all together combined in a humanoid form interface that someone, or it's not someone, but a robot, someone can come to your house and do the dishes or do actual useful input. And not only at your house, but imagine you walk to a factory and humanoid form robots are doing what current people are they're doing. Or now even think about how powerful it would be if the humanoid robot could have AI inside and could interact with you just like a regular employee in a company. So it has huge, huge potential. One of the questions will be on price and how much, not so much on cost, but really on price. What is the value of a humanoid robot like that? And then I guess we'll see different specializations, and depending on the specialization, similar to what we saw with the OpenAI agents that were released, they will have different price points. But it is super, super inspiring, super exciting time to be alive, frankly.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I think there are a lot of industries we can compare it to. I think, construction's a good one, or just generally the automotive sector, because I would class as like big construction vehicles are part of that sector, or even like, the fire brigade, or specific, ambulances, specific tailored solutions, which, the cost of a proper fire truck is insane. It's multiple £1 million, right? It's it's the same here, right? I think you'll get bespoke models, you'll get the generic Toyota equivalent, right? Well, the Tesla, I guess, what version? So it's that next level of, to me, like those sorts of industries, really, because it's about, it used to be this case, like you said, you had to interface properly with technology and do something. Now it can do stuff for you, right? Like effectively you use the car to go pick up groceries. Well, now you just send the robot, right? That is going to be really powerful. And I think what I think has been really, really smart in terms of what Musk has decided to focus on is the synergies of different industries. So, I can already see the impact of combining a Tesla with robotics because, having those synergies is going to be so much more powerful in terms of the ecosystem, right? He's built this massive charging network. How will he use that to charge up your robot? Those sorts of things. It's just going to be is super well done. It's really is impressive to have that 5 steps ahead mentality. I think we need
Yeah.
to see more of that.
And do you know who's another company that is betting big on humanoid robots? It's Meta.
Meta, yeah.
And again, it's for the same reason, right? I mean, I think it's Meta is a company that is also really well placed to capitalize on all of these trends, and that could have a lot of synergies when it comes to humanoid robots. Imagine them being able to integrate their Llama AI models. They also have the network effects. They've built this huge network. How could they use that network when applied to things like AI, like humanoid robots? What are the synergies that can come from that? They have this entire business unit. I now forget how's it called. It was something like it's the same Reality Labs. It's
Reality
the
Labs, yeah.
same. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, in any case, it's their robotics arm. And a fun fact about that is they're currently losing 5 billion a year on that division, on the robotics division.
It's
So that
insane.
unit is losing 5 billion, which just shows you how much they are investing in this. Because I don't think it will be a winner takes all market, but certainly, like with everything, whoever comes first can capitalize on a huge chunk of the opportunity. And how much is that worth? Well, certainly more than 5 billion. We'll see. But it's a really, really interesting race going on.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's even a physical race. We'll see which one runs the fastest, quite literally. So it'll be
Yeah,
quite
that will
fun.
be fun. Should we have? We should create Olympic games for
I was I
humanoid
was gonna say
robots.
I was gonna say like those movies which have like robots competing and whatnot. I think that would be crazy, like different levels of like wrestling and like racing on track would be really cool.
Yeah, it's like these battles where you put two robots and they just fight each other. I've seen them for like years and years, but just that on a different scale with humanoid robots. That would be
Man,
sick.
I would totally go
I would
watch
watch
that.
that.
I would
Yeah.
so watch that. That would be so cool. Can you imagine like massive robots just having a crazy fight? Ah,
Imagine
that would be
boxing for robots.
insane.
That would be so
Just like
fun.
metal like flying across a room and just like
Yeah.
just before it hits you gets caught by the net sort of thing. Like that would be insane.
Um. Okay, so should we move to our next topic? I mean, it's sort of related with that, right? Maybe Dan, you can introduce it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so that something we've not touched on, but I'm sure our listeners are thinking and is in the back of our mind is this is all great stuff, right? As a human generation, as a race, we're moving into that next level of technology enablement. Like it will continue to revolutionize the way we work, the way we think, the way we act, the way our priorities, our values, and probably the real big focus points for us as a humanity. But the big question then is, so what happens with the people who are currently doing those jobs, but also what is going to go on with, jobs that these could replace or right? In terms of we talked about robotics integrating with AI, well, then you can have a white collar workforce in the office. So how do you navigate those things? And I think you had some interesting articles, Juan, if you want to introduce your view,
Yeah.
and I'll build on that.
No, so that's a very good introduction actually, because um, for years and years, and yeah, I read a few articles on this. Um, Employers around the world claim labor shortages, and that can be felt through boom times and also recessions. It just seems like there are always labor shortages. And even Marco Rubio said the other day that there are currently three. So Marco Rubio, who is the new U.S. Secretary of State, said that there are currently 3 million jobs available in America, and they're not filled because too many of our people, so the Americans, don't have the skills for those jobs. And then it was very interesting because so I was reading through this article, and I forget if it was on the Financial Times or on the Economist, and then I read this other one that was talking about a report published either earlier this year or at the end of last year that said that there were more overqualified workers than ever before, and especially in England, 37% of people are overqualified for their jobs versus the OECD average of 23%. I mean, the fact that the average is 23% of workers being overqualified for their roles is just astonishing. And so, yeah, here there are several points. Maybe Dan, we can get your immediate reaction, but then I do want to mention a few points.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really, really interesting point to come up. I read both articles. So The Economist was, I think, the first one you were talking about, and the Financial Times the second. For anybody who wants to have a look, we can add that also in the comments if anybody's interested. Um, yeah, I found it a really, really interesting point because you're really now showing that transparency of like, okay, wait, how does the world operate? What is going on? The over education sort of thing is a interesting and a bit of a controversial, I think, topic. What I was seeing was, yes, I agree. I looked into the reason why, uh, to understand why would the UK in particularly have this, right? I know that, I mean, we know it from context, but 51% of people in the UK have tertiary education, which means they went to university. Did they actually go to a university degree, or did they go and party for 3 years and not really develop any skills as a result? That's where the quality of education comes in as well. So I think it is quite, it is an important point. It also doesn't take that next level of breakdown of, well, if you do a degree in the UK, there are levels to it, right? You have the good, strong universities, and then, to be honest, what I would consider polytechnics, so not actual universities who've been rebranded to be universities, right? If you do a degree in Formula One at UCLan, notorious for being one of the worst universities in the UK, then that's not really worthwhile. It's definitely financially not worthwhile, and people will give the excuse of it being an experience and everybody's doing it socially, but it isn't really an education, right? A university education.
Yeah.
That might be a bit controversial, but that's my view.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, well, you're absolutely right on at least one point that is factually correct, which is there are just a really high amount of graduates, which if you combine with insufficient graduate level roles, then that leads to an underutilization of the skills that you're theoretically taught at university. And I think it's a cultural thing for sure that people more and more are delaying the start of their productive lives. And when I say productive, I mean in terms of going out into the job market and actually doing a job. Where now people finish school, then they take a gap year, then they go and do a graduate program. Then after you do a graduate program, you need to do a master's because now you're no one if you don't have a master's. And then after you do a master's, then you can do a PhD. And after you do a PhD, which is another 6 years, then you can actually do a postdoc. And so it's like the wheel never stops spinning, and I think more and more people are getting into that wheel, and that can be a problem in itself. And there's a question there if we need to rethink the current educational model, which might be outpacing the actual economic demands. Is like, to your point, is it valuable for some people to be going to those so-called universities or rebranded universities instead of just doing more productive work like an apprenticeship or I don't know, let's say lower level education that can get them into a productive role? So that's one point. The other point is that, and it's very interesting, in the post-pandemic hiring surge, so when demand for workers ran ahead of supply for those workers, the average wages spiked by around 20%. So until then, central banks hiked interest rates to cool inflation and all that, obviously. But that just goes to show, in a way, that a healthy economy, and this is to your point that you were making, I think it was last week, a healthy economy does not have 0% unemployment. I think you put it like this the other day, that you said, if you get 100 random people off the street, you probably wouldn't want all 100 of them working for you, right? So there's that. And then when you dig into the data, the evidences of those shortages kind of melts away. And it's a very interesting industry to focus on, and I think you brought it up as well, is construction. So America's home builders typically were in talks of a dire need for more resources and new workers. And the reality is that actually, I looked this up earlier, the American workforce, so the percentage of the American workforce involved in construction went up from 4.5% to 5.2%. And still, people were screaming shortage. And the reality is that the wages are not going up at the same level as other industries. So that speaks that people simply don't want to pay more for their builders, and that is just a perfect economic market equilibrium, right? So it's just how the market works.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point there, and I think, on my 100, would you hire 100 people off the street point, you, let's say you don't hire three in particular, I think, rather than just, being a douche, and that's the reason why, because they're not good, is actually it also stimulates competitiveness. So what we've seen is that industries and economies thrive when there is a competitive nature, when there is a key competitor, when there are people there. And the same thing applies with inflation, right? If you stay static and everything stayed the same, then you'd be like, hang on, well, there's no drive, there's no push factor to keep moving. So actually that's where, having 2 to 3% inflation, 2 to 3% unemployment rate is the right level of push without being a detrimental amount. If you look at like the studies I've read, maybe it's slightly more nowadays as the economy and technologies have shifted the way work works. But I think that's a really, really important one. Yeah, the other thing on the UK point, which I thought was really interesting, was I had a quick look on the OECD's website, right, and their report that they published. And it
Uh-huh.
was really interesting to see the difference to other economies in terms of the difference between a secondary earner, let's say secondary education, somebody who's gone to like A levels or high school and then gone
Okay.
into the workforce versus
So maybe we
tertiary.
can so what is primary, what is secondary, what is tertiary?
Yeah, so primary would be finishing school at 16, so like a
Okay.
basic level, education level. Secondary would be those who've gone on to complete an A level or A level equivalent in the UK. And then the tertiary would be your undergraduate level education. Then you can have, within that you can have quaternary sectors as well, which revolves around research, PhDs, etc. Now that
Got it.
that
Okay.
field is a bit blurry, but if I just thought I'd quickly show you something. Da, da, da.
You
Okay,
just love sharing your screen, don't you?
no, I really do. So
That's super cool.
this this is a graph around the difference between the effectively the relative earnings of a worker in different countries. So it considers a few different factors. So it uses the ISCED, which is a well recognized basically acronym within international organizations on basically how strong that lifestyle is. It's similar to like a purchasing power, but has more of a social component, let's say. And what we see is that effectively at the bottom, we have from left to right the upper secondary by country, and then at the top you have the tertiary relative earnings, right? And you can see that we go from the highest in those countries to the lowest. And what's really interesting is to see the big delta that makes, right? So if you look overall, you can see the UK has a quite a low upper secondary relative earning.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you do notice that, especially versus its European peers, what we're saying is that the quality of life effectively is a lot worse. Well, a bit worse if you have a secondary education. Now, therefore, the gap and the delta is bigger to to what the relative earning is for the tertiary sector. Now, one of the arguments why this might be lower than some of its peers, right, is the fact that effectively, because you've got this low number and these low opportunities, this artificially is dragged down because some of the individuals in this bucket actually might be it's more of a spectrum, right? Um, so that was an interesting point in this report I was reading. It's also really interesting to see the biggest deltas, right? I mean, being half Colombian, I find this quite sad, but also it makes sense from what I've seen when I've
Mm.
been. That it really makes a huge difference in terms of your quality of life, even basic needs. But having said that, right, it's not in terms of a relative index, it's not that far off from the UK, Colombia. So
Yeah.
yeah, just thought I'd share
No,
that
that is.
with you.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think that was very interesting. It just goes to show that too many people are going into tertiary education, and that doesn't pay off as much just because of the sheer volume. Like, it would be interesting to see what percentage of the population get those levels of education, and then contrast that to that picture that we had there, because I think that that is a key factor that plays a part in it. There's also another point. So, obviously, to the point that you made earlier, yeah, let's not be mean to those bottom 3-5% of people. I think everyone has different skills, and so everyone fits differently in different industries, and that's why you have very different disciplines that you can go and pick up, right? But it is true that it is very much a curve. And so if you look at the Pareto principle, 80% of the work is done by 20% of the employees. And actually, the bottom 5% in any given business probably have even a slight negative impact, which is why organizations have to purge themselves. So I think more than a job shortage, it is more of a high performer shortage that we have currently. And this is especially reflected in the fact that in some cases, and I do see this sometimes through my work, organizations sometimes are designed around individuals and people. And that basically means that you're designing around very valuable skills. So if you take, for example, a footballer, you can organize your entire team around having a player like Messi or like Ronaldo. I mean, this analogy just plays perfectly because if you look at, for any football fans out there, if you look at Barcelona, they had designed their entire team around Messi. The moment that Messi left, Barcelona just hasn't recovered yet. It really hasn't. And so if you have an opening in your organization and what you need is someone like Messi or Ronaldo to do the job, sometimes even rising the salary of that position may not get you the person that you need. And so, and that is a very big problem that we encounter when working with different companies. So I guess lesson learned: never design your organization around people.
That's super interesting. That really is.
Although, so this is the point, right? There are certain levels of risk. So I'm going to take that statement back because never design an organization around people if you are in a late stage company. If you're in more of an early stage, you can use that actually as a high risk, unfair advantage. And if you really have brilliant people that can take responsibility for big things, and you can build the team around them to support them, then that is great. Although it is high risk because the moment that that person leaves, then it leaves a void in the team that is very hard to fill. But you can use it. It is just the types of businesses that we use, we work with typically are more at the, so we work primarily with private equity portfolio companies. And so at that level, you really don't want, so you really want to minimize your risk, essentially. So that's why we would never design an organization around people. But again, if you're early stage, by all means, you can leverage that unfair advantage.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. I like that. I think that's a really good anecdote. I think, unless there's anything else you want to cover, I think we can wrap
I
it
think
up.
we've covered very good ground. Yeah. So to anyone listening, again, thank you for being there every week. So the people that listen to us, that you're the reason why we do this and why we keep doing it, even though we're not very big yet. But if you have listened till the end and you want to support us, you can always give us a follow, subscribe to all of our platforms, etc. Hit the notification bell and all those sorts of things. But yeah, it does help us a lot, and it helps us to realize if you are liking the content or not. So please do that. Please leave any comments. And yeah, from my side, I'll see you next week.
Yep. Same here.